Say it again louder. Who here thinks she doesn't belong near the exit row? The armrest clicks. The drink cart rattles. 30 minutes from now, nobody's laughing. The words came from 5B business class, where Grant Harlan sat with his Patek Philippe glinting under the cabin lights and his laptop open to a spreadsheet he wasn't really reading. He was 45 tall in that aggressive way some men wore height, with steel gray hair cut sharp enough to draw blood, and a voice that assumed compliance. He wasn't asking. He was declaring. The woman in 8A exit row window seat, worn Northwestern hoodie, pulled low, didn't look up, didn't flinch, just sat with her hands folded across her lap, breathing slowly, eyes closed behind the shadow of her hood, like she hadn't heard. Or like she'd heard worse and learned that silence was armor. Paige Scott, flight attendant, with 12 years of smiling through confrontation, appeared beside Grant's seat with professional speed. "Mr. Harlan, is there something I can help you with?" "Yes." He gestured toward 8A with his chin, not bothering to lower his voice. "That woman, the one who looks like she's headed to a homeless shelter instead of an emergency exit. Is she really qualified to sit there?" Around them, conversations died. Heads turned. Business travelers looked up from phones. Families paused mid-snack distribution. The universal human instinct to watch someone else get humiliated kicked in, and suddenly 20 pairs of eyes focused on the woman in the hoodie who still hadn't moved. Paige's smile tightened at the corners. "Sir, all passengers in exit rows have confirmed they're willing and able to assist in an emergency. FAA regulations." "I know the regulations," Grant cut her off. "I also know what liability looks like, and that," he pointed, now direct and deliberate, "is a lawsuit waiting to happen." The woman's right hand resting on the armrest trembled slightly. Grant saw it. So did the man in 6D Richard Moss attorney Yale degree iPhone already raised and filming. "He's right," Richard said loud enough to carry. "This is negligent. I'm documenting everything." The woman in 8A opened her eyes. Dark brown, almost black, empty of everything except exhaustion. She looked at Grant Harlan for exactly 2 seconds, then closed her eyes again and went back to breathing. Like he didn't exist. Like none of them did. Kesha Washington was 35, but looked older in the wrong light and younger in the right one. The hoodie didn't help Northwestern University logo faded to ghost purple fabric, pilled at the elbows, drawstrings frayed. Her jeans had that particular shade of blue that came from 100 washes and 0 fabric softener. The sneakers were worse white canvas, gone gray tread, worn flat in the center where her weight distributed during long walks because she couldn't afford gas, and the bus didn't run to her neighborhood after 9 p.m. The duffel bag under her seat told the same story. Olive green canvas military surplus, or thrift store with duct tape holding one corner together and a zipper that caught every third pull. Inside a water bottle, a cracked screen tablet, a protein bar she'd been saving for later, and things she didn't let herself think about. She'd chosen 8A deliberately. Exit row, window, $50 extra that she'd paid without hesitation because the exit row meant legroom, and legroom meant she could position her feet, flat knees, bent, weight balanced. Ready stance. The kind of posture you learned when sitting still could get you killed and forgot only if you were lucky enough to never need it again. Her hands rested on the armrests now, and if you looked closely, really looked, you'd see details that didn't match the rest of her. Calluses on the fingertips. Not from typing or manual labor, but from something more specific. The kind you got from gripping controls that vibrated at 500 knots. The kind that built up over 1,000 hours and never fully went away. Her right hand trembled, just slightly, a fine motor tremor that could have been nerves or caffeine or something neurological. It wasn't constant. It came and went in waves triggered by stress, or exhaustion, or the particular kind of adrenaline spike that happened when strangers accused you of being incompetent in front of a cabin full of witnesses. The woman beside her, 8B middle seat floral blouse, and an expression that said, "I just want to get to Chicago without drama," had noticed the shaking. She'd glanced at Keisha's hand twice now, then looked away quickly, the way people did when they saw something that made them uncomfortable, but didn't want to seem rude. Across the aisle, Harold Peterson noticed too. 62 Air Force veteran, 30 years maintaining F-15s before retirement gave him a pension and too much time to think. He'd taken 8C aisle seat exit row because old habits died hard, and he still liked knowing where the exits were. He watched Keisha the way mechanics watched pilots, cataloging details, reading body language, looking for tells. The way she'd boarded last, deliberate scanning the cabin before sitting. The way she'd stowed her bag, controlled motion, no wasted energy. The way she sat now, spine straight, feet positioned, hands placed exactly where they could push off fastest. That wasn't civilian posture. That was tactical. That was someone who'd been trained to move from zero to action in under a second and couldn't untrain it, no matter how long they'd been grounded. But she wore thrift store clothes and sat in economy and shook when people yelled at her, so maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was seeing patterns that weren't there. Maybe 30 years of reading pilots had finally made him paranoid. Still, something about her didn't fit. The Boeing 767 pushed back from gate B-17 at Denver International at 4:23 p.m., Mountain Time, 17 minutes behind schedule, because a catering truck had broken down and someone in corporate had decided passengers needed fresh sandwiches more than on-time departure. Captain David Martinez ran through the pre-flight checklist with the methodical calm of 28 years and 11,000 flight hours. 55 reading glasses perched on his nose, salt and pepper hair thinning at the crown. Beside him, First Officer Tara Johnson mirrored his movements with the careful precision of someone still new enough to worry about making mistakes. 28 years old, 800 hours total time, 3 months on the 767. She was good. David had flown with worse. But good and experienced weren't the same thing, and tonight's weather was going to test the difference. Frontal systems moving through Iowa. Tara set eyes on the weather display. "We should be over the top at flight level 370. "Should be." David's tone suggested he'd heard "should be" before, and knew how often it turned into wasn't. "Let's get vectors around anything that paints red." "Copy." The engines spooled up. The 767 lumbered toward runway 34 right wings, flexing slightly as they turned 212 passengers, settling into seats that were 3 inches too narrow and reclined 4 inches too little. The usual discomfort of modern air travel: trust strangers with your life, pay for the privilege, and complain about legroom, while ignoring the fact that you were about to fly 6 miles high at 600 miles per hour in a metal tube held together by physics and maintenance schedules. Keisha felt the acceleration before the engines changed pitch. Muscle memory. She'd spent enough hours in cockpits to know the sound of turbines transitioning from ground idle to takeoff thrust, the vibration through the airframe, the particular way the nose wanted to lift before the pilots rotated. She opened her eyes as the wheels left the ground. Watched Denver fall away below terminal buildings, cargo hangars, the Rockies cutting their jagged line against a sky that was already losing light. Sunset at 37,000 feet came fast in October. They'd be flying into darkness within 20 minutes. The seatbelt sign stayed on as they climbed through 10,000 feet. The plane shuddered slightly, punching through a thin cloud layer. Normal. Nothing to worry about. Most passengers didn't notice. Kesha noticed. She felt the frequency of the vibration, counted the interval between bumps, assessed whether it was atmospheric or mechanical. Old habit. The kind that got you through emergencies and haunted you during routine flights because you couldn't stop analyzing every tremor like it might be the one that mattered. 15 minutes into the flight, the first real turbulence hit. Not severe, just enough to make drinks slosh and conversations pause. The seatbelt sign chimed back on. Paige's voice over the intercom. Folks, captain's asking everyone to stay seated. We're hitting some light chop. Light became moderate within 3 minutes. The plane started bucking that uncomfortable roller coaster motion that made stomachs flip and hands grip armrests. Overhead, bins rattled. Someone's bag shifted with a thud. Grant Harlan stood up. Sir, Paige appeared instantly, hand-out voice firm. Sir, you need to sit down. I need to talk to the captain. Grant's voice carried across the cabin, pitched for an audience. This turbulence is unacceptable. I have a right to know what's being done about it. Mr. Harlan, the pilots are handling... Are they? Because it feels like we're just flying straight through weather we should be avoiding. He gestured toward 8A without looking. And if something happens, if we have to evacuate, I want assurance that everyone in an exit row is actually capable of helping. Heads turned. Again. All eyes on Kesha. Again. She sat perfectly still. Eyes closed. Breathing slow and even. 4 counts in. Hold 4. 4 counts out. Hold 4. Combat breathing. The kind special operations taught to stay calm under fire. Brad Simmons. 9. F. Veteran ball cap. 2 years flying Hueys in Germany that he'd turned into a decade of war stories, leaned forward. He's got a point. That woman's been shaking since we boarded. Probably scared of flying. You really want her responsible for opening an emergency exit. His wife touched his arm. Brad, maybe. No, I'm serious. I flew helicopters. I know what capability looks like. That's not it. The woman in 8B glanced at Kesha's trembling hand again. This time she didn't look away. This time her expression said, maybe they're right. Grant pressed the call button twice. Hard. I want this documented. If anything happens and she can't perform, this airline is legally liable. Sir, document it. Paige's jaw tightened. 12 years of dealing with passengers who thought volume equaled authority had taught her when to push back and when to retreat. This was a retreat moment. I'll note your concerns. She disappeared toward the galley, and Grant sat down with the satisfied air of someone who'd won. Richard Moss, 6D attorney filming everything, nodded approvingly. Smart. Establish the record now. The plane dropped suddenly, 50 feet in 2 seconds. Stomachs lurched. The woman in 8B gasped and grabbed Keisha's arm fingers, digging through the hoodie fabric. Keisha opened her eyes, looked at her. It's just turbulence. The plane's designed for this. Are you sure? I'm sure. But her hand was still shaking, and everyone could see it. The turbulence built like a symphony, warming up, disjointed at first, then finding rhythm, then crescendoing into something that demanded attention. The plane shook continuously now, not dramatic drops, but constant vibration, the kind that made teeth chatter and nerves fray. Kesha opened her eyes fully. Not from fear, from focus. Her gaze went to the window. Not for the view, there wasn't one anymore. Just darkness, and the occasional strobe of the wing light cutting through cloud, but to watch the wing itself. The way the metal flexed, bent, straightened, oscillated with each gust and correction. Most passengers found it terrifying. That visible proof that the plane wasn't solid, that it bent and twisted and relied on tolerance levels they couldn't understand. Engineers called it design. Kesha called it language. The wing was talking. You just had to know how to listen. She counted the oscillations, frequency, amplitude. The flex was increasing maybe 6 inches of vertical travel at the wingtip, now regular pattern, consistent frequency. That meant convective turbulence. Heat pockets rising through unstable air. The front was building faster than forecast. Harold Peterson, 8C aisle seat, watched her watching the wing. He'd spent 30 years around aircraft. 30 years reading the way pilots read instruments, the way mechanics read metal fatigue, the way anyone who worked in aviation learned to see problems before they announced themselves. This woman wasn't looking at the wing like a nervous passenger checking if it might fall off. She was assessing it, calculating something. Her lips moved slightly, counting maybe, or muttering calculations he couldn't hear. Then she whispered something. One word. No, not a word. A number. 7700. Harold's head snapped toward her. That wasn't a random number. That was a squawk code. The transponder code pilots used for emergencies. Squawk 7700 meant hijacking. Squawk 7600 meant radio failure. Squawk 7500 meant... Why would a passenger know squawk codes? Keisha's hand moved to the overhead panel. Not obvious, not dramatic, just a casual reach like she was adjusting the air vent. But her fingers brushed the oxygen mask compartment felt along the edge, found the release tab, pressed it slightly to test resistance. Pre-flight check. Pilot habit, making sure the mask would deploy if needed, that the door wasn't jammed, that the seal integrity was intact. Paige walked past, saw the motion, paused. "Ma'am, please don't touch the oxygen system." "I wasn't." Kesha's hand dropped. "Just checking if it's loose." Rattling. "It's secure." Paige's eyes narrowed slightly. Something about the way this woman had checked it, professional, methodical, didn't match someone who looked homeless. "Have you flown before?" "A few times." "You seem familiar with the equipment." "I pay attention to safety briefings." It was a lie delivered so flatly it almost sounded true. Paige moved on, but Harold saw the exchange, saw the way Kesha's fingers had moved, not fumbling, not uncertain, but with the muscle memory of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The plane dropped again. Harder. 100 feet in 3 seconds. Screams erupted. Someone's tablet flew into the aisle and shattered. The baby 4 rows back went from crying to shrieking. Keisha's hands shot to the armrests, both of them instantly gripped tight. But not the white-knuckled panic grip of a scared passenger. Controlled. Precise. Biomechanically efficient, protecting neck and spine from whiplash while maintaining situational awareness. Her right hand, the one that had been shaking, was suddenly rock steady. Harold stared. The tremor was gone. Completely. Like it had never been there. Like it had been something else entirely. The plane leveled out. The shaking returned to Kesha's hand almost immediately. But for those 3 seconds during the drop, when instinct overrode everything else, her hands had been surgeon steady. Harold looked at those hands now. Really looked. The calluses were wrong for manual labor. Too specific. Fingertips and the meat of the palm where a control stick would rest. The webbing between thumb and forefinger showed wear consistent with gripping something cylindrical under high vibration. And there, barely visible beneath the frayed cuff of her hoodie, a thin scar along the inside of her left wrist. Straight line. Surgical precision. The kind of scar you got from medical hardware. Plates. Pins. The kind of injury that came from ejection seats or high G maneuvers gone wrong. He opened his mouth to say something. Keisha turned and looked directly at him. Her eyes said, "Don't." He closed his mouth, said nothing, but he kept watching. The turbulence didn't fade. It evolved. What had been uncomfortable became concerning. What had been concerning became dangerous. The plane wasn't just shaking anymore. It was lurching sudden, uncommanded rolls that felt like the sky was slapping them sideways. In the cockpit, Tara Johnson's voice went tight. "David, I'm showing wind shear alerts. Vertical component is increasing." Captain Martinez frowned at his displays. The weather radar had been painting yellow and green cells 15 miles ahead. Now those cells were red, and they were closer. Much closer. "When did that build?" Last scan was clear. This came up in 3 minutes. "Request deviation." Tara keyed the radio. "Denver Center United 4387. requesting left deviation 20 degrees for weather. Static. Then, United 4387 unable. Traffic at your 10 o'clock same altitude. Maintain present heading. David's jaw tightened. Unable wasn't what you wanted to hear when you had 200 passengers and weather building. Copy maintaining. He glanced at Tara. Try again in 5. See if traffic clears. But 5 minutes later, the answer was the same. Maintain heading. They were boxed in. Traffic on the left, restricted airspace on the right, weather straight ahead. The only way out was through. The plane hit the leading edge of the cell and dropped like someone had cut the strings. 300 feet in 5 seconds. Pure free fall. Gravity vanished. Floating sensation. Overhead bins popping open. Bags tumbling. Laptops flying. A woman's purse exploded across 3 rows contents, scattering like shrapnel. Screaming. Not just one person, dozens. The primal sound humans made when physics reminded them they were fragile and mortal, and 6 miles above ground in a machine that suddenly felt more like a carnival ride than transportation. Grant Harlan grabbed his armrests and shouted over the noise. "This is unacceptable," his voice cracked, fear bleeding through authority. "We should have avoided this. Where's the captain?" Paige appeared from the galley, gripping seat backs for balance, face professionally neutral despite the fact that she'd just watched $300 worth of drinks shatter across the galley floor. "Sir, please remain seated." "I'm not sitting quietly while we fly into a storm. I demand to speak to the pilots." He unbuckled, stood. The plane rolled 15 degrees and threw him against the bulkhead. He caught himself barely and used the momentum to push toward the cockpit. "Get me the captain now. Sir, now." Richard Moss was filming again, phone held high, documenting everything. Passenger safety concerns ignored. Pilots unresponsive to requests. This is negligence. Brad Simmons unbuckled too. Stood. His wife grabbed his arm. "Brad, sit down. Someone needs to check on what's happening up there." He moved into the aisle, found his balance. Looked back at Keisha, still sitting, eyes closed, hands on armrests, breathing measured. "And if we have to evacuate, I want someone competent handling that door, not her." 3 passengers near the exit row murmured agreement. The woman in 8B shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Kesha like she was suddenly sitting next to a liability instead of a person. The plane shuddered again. Not a drop this time, a roll. 20 degrees left. Correcting overcorrecting right. The autopilot fighting wind that changed direction faster than software could compensate. Paige's voice went sharp. "Everyone sit down right now, or I will have you restrained." "I'm a paying passenger. You're a hazard, sit." Grant hesitated. Richard lowered his phone. Brad looked uncertain. The plane rolled again and made the decision for them. All 3 grabbed seats and collapsed into them, the illusion of control stripped away by simple physics. But the damage was done. The cabin was scared now. Properly scared. The kind of fear that looked for someone to blame, someone to focus on a scapegoat to make the randomness feel manageable. And everyone kept looking at 8A, at the woman with the shaking hands, at the woman who didn't look capable, at the woman who sat so still she might as well have been carved from stone. Keisha's eyes opened. She looked at the emergency exit door beside her, 30 inches wide, 60 pounds, designed to be opened from inside by pulling a handle that required 40 pounds of force and precise technique to avoid jamming. She could open that door in 3 seconds. In the dark, in smoke, upside down. She'd done it 100 times in training. But nobody here knew that. Nobody knew anything except what they saw: a woman in a worn hoodie who shook when people yelled and didn't fight back when they called her incompetent. She closed her eyes again. Let them think what they wanted. She'd learned a long time ago that proving yourself to people who'd already decided you were worthless was a waste of energy better spent staying alive. If you're already feeling the tension, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. This woman isn't who they think she is. The turbulence raged on. In the cockpit, Captain David Martinez felt the pressure bloom across his chest like someone had placed a hot iron against his sternum. Not sharp, not stabbing, just there spreading, radiating down his left arm up into his jaw, squeezing. He ignored it. Stress. Tension. 28 years of flying had taught him that adrenaline did weird things to the body. This was just turbulence. Just weather. Just another flight that would end with wheels on pavement and passengers complaining about delays. The pressure increased. His vision blurred at the edges. The instruments doubled. Tripled swam in and out of focus. He blinked hard. Tried to take a deep breath. Couldn't. His lungs wouldn't expand fully, like someone was sitting on his chest. David, Tara's voice sounded distant, underwater. David, you okay? He tried to answer. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The yoke slipped from his fingers. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the altimeter spinning the plane still bucking and Tara's face turning toward him with an expression he'd seen in nightmares but never in real life. Pure, unfiltered, terror. David. She grabbed his shoulder, shook him. David, stay with me. No response. His head lolled, eyes half open but not seeing, skin pale, lips going gray. Tara hit the call button, 3 short, 2 long. Emergency. Code for I need help, and I need it now. Paige burst through the cockpit door 10 seconds later, saw the captain slumped, saw Tara's face, understood immediately. Medical emergency. Get a doctor, now. Tara's hands were shaking. 800 hours suddenly felt like 8. I think it's his heart. Paige vanished. Her voice echoed through the cabin, pitched higher than professional calm should allow. Is there a doctor on board? We need medical assistance immediately. Dr. Catherine Reed was out of her seat before the question finished. 10C to the cockpit in 12 seconds, cardiology instincts overriding FAA regulations about staying seated during turbulence. She squeezed into the cramped space fingers, already on Martinez's neck, feeling for a pulse. Weak, thready, irregular. Suspected myocardial infarction, she said. Clinical, detached. The voice doctors used when emotional distance was the only thing keeping panic at bay. He needs aspirin oxygen and a hospital, in that order. We're 40 minutes from Chicago, Tara said. Her voice cracked. I've never landed a 767 solo. Then we find someone who has. Catherine turned to Paige. Ask if there's any pilot on board. Any experience, anything. Paige grabbed the intercom. Her voice filled the cabin, stripped of pretense, now just raw need. This is an emergency. If there is anyone on board with pilot experience, any experience, we need your help immediately. Please identify yourself to a flight attendant. Silence. Then Grant Harlan stood up. I have a pilot's license. Every head turned. Hope flickered across faces. Someone with credentials. Someone official. Someone who could save them. How many hours? Paige asked. 500. Private pilot. Single engine land. Have you ever flown a commercial jet? No, but I understand the basics. I can assist. It wasn't qualified. It wasn't adequate. But it was something. Paige nodded. Come with me. Grant moved toward the cockpit with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything important. Richard Moss filmed him going. Brad Simmons watched with something like respect. In 8A, Keisha's eyes opened. Harold Peterson saw her expression change. Saw calculation replace passivity. Saw her hands flex on the armrests, tremor vanishing for half a second before returning. She was going to stand up. He knew it. Saw the decision forming. Saw her weight shift forward. But before she could move, Brad Simmons turned in his seat, looked directly at her. Don't even think about it. You've been shaking since we boarded. The last thing we need is someone unstable touching the controls. Grant was in the cockpit now, voice carrying back through the open door. Okay, let's see what we're working with. 5 seconds of silence. Then, I don't understand this panel. This isn't like a Cessna. I can't. Tara's voice desperate. The autopilot's handling the basic flight path, but we need someone who can manage the approach, the descent profile, I don't know how to do that. Grant's voice went small, stripped of authority. I thought I could help, but I'm sorry. This is beyond my capability. He stumbled out of the cockpit, sat back in 5B, put his head in his hands. The cabin absorbed this new reality. They had no captain, an overwhelmed first officer, and turbulence that showed no signs of stopping. Page's voice again, higher now, tinged with something that sounded like desperation. Is there anyone else? Anyone with multi-engine experience? Kesha stood up. Brad Simmons shot to his feet. No, absolutely not. Richard Moss. She's been shaking the entire flight. She's not fit. Grant Harlan looked up, saw Keisha standing, and found his voice again. I agree. She looks like she can barely handle sitting in a seat, let alone flying a plane. This is reckless. The woman in 8B shrank away from Kesha, like proximity to her was dangerous. 3 more passengers voiced agreement. A man in 12D, we need someone stable. Keisha stood in the aisle, said nothing. Her right hand trembled visibly. Her face showed nothing. No anger, no hurt, no frustration. Just that same carved stone emptiness. Brad moved to block the aisle. Ma'am, sit down. You're not helping. Let her speak. Harold Peterson's voice cut through. He stood too. Let the woman speak before you decide what she can or can't do. She's shaking, Brad pointed. Look at her. That's not someone I want anywhere near a cockpit. Dr. Reed emerged from the cockpit. We need help. I don't care who it comes from. It can't come from her. Grant stood again. I'm calling for a vote. Everyone who thinks she should stay in her seat, raise your hand. 15 hands went up. Everyone who thinks she's qualified. Harold raised his hand. Dr. Reed hesitated, then raised hers. 2 against 15. There's your answer, Grant said. Sit down, ma'am. We'll figure this out without you. Kesha looked at Harold, at Dr. Reed, at the wall of opposition in front of her. At the cockpit door, where Tara Johnson was probably 30 seconds from a full panic attack. She sat down. The plane rolled hard. The turbulence wasn't stopping. And now there was a new sound, an alarm from the cockpit, faint but distinct. A warning tone Keisha recognized instantly. Weather radar failure. They were flying blind. The alarm in the cockpit wasn't loud, just persistent. A steady electronic chirp that meant something critical had failed, and the pilots needed to acknowledge it before the system assumed they were dead or unconscious and started making decisions without them. Tara silenced it with a trembling hand, stared at the weather radar display. The screen that should have been showing storm cells in red and yellow now showed nothing but static gray emptiness. Radar's down, she said to no one in particular. Dr. Reed was still there, standing behind the center console, watching vitals on a portable monitor connected to Captain Martinez. We're flying blind. Catherine glanced up. Can you navigate without it? In clear weather, yes. In this, Tara gestured at the windscreen where rain hammered like gravel and lightning strobed every few seconds. I need to know where the cells are. I need to know what's ahead. But the radar was gone. Lightning strike, maybe. Electrical fault. It didn't matter why. It only mattered that they were now flying through a frontal system with no way to see where the worst weather was hiding. The next alarm came 30 seconds later, different tone, lower frequency, more urgent, engine ice. Tara's eyes snapped to the ECAS display, engine indicating and crew alerting system, where amber caution messages were stacking up like accusations. ENG-2 ice. The right engine was ingesting ice. Small particles at first probably, but building. Ice changed the airflow through the turbine, disrupted combustion, reduced thrust. If it built up enough, it could flame out the engine entirely. She reached for the anti-ice switches, flipped them on. Hot air from the engines would bleed into the inlet cowls, melting the ice before it could accumulate. Standard procedure. Textbook response. But anti-ice came with a cost. It bled engine pressure, reduced efficiency, increased fuel consumption by 15%. Tara looked at the fuel gauges. 6,200 pounds remaining. At normal consumption, that was enough to reach Chicago with standard reserves. With anti-ice running on both engines, they'd burn through an extra 900 pounds. She did the math in her head, came up with an answer she didn't like. "We can't make Chicago," she said aloud. "Dr. Reed, what fuel? We don't have enough. We need to divert." "Where?" Tara pulled up the navigation display. Nearest suitable airport was Des Moines KDSM, 90 miles southwest. Big enough for a 767. Long runways, instrument approaches, emergency services. She checked the weather. Her stomach dropped. Des Moines was reporting visibility 1/4 mile in heavy rain, ceiling 200 feet, right at minimums for an ILS approach. Any lower, and they legally couldn't attempt it. She keyed the radio. "Denver Center United 4387 declaring an emergency. We're diverting to Des Moines. Pilot incapacitated, single pilot operation requesting priority handling." The controller's voice came back instantly, professionalism masking concern. "United 4387, Roger, emergency declared. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Vectors to KDSM on request. Souls on board and fuel remaining." 212 souls. Fuel is 6,000 pounds. A pause. Barely perceptible. Just long enough for the controller to realize how tight the margins were. "Copy. Expect vectors in 5 miles. Emergency equipment will be standing by." Tara started the descent. The plane nosed down, and she felt the turbulence shift, different character, now heavier, like they were pushing through something solid instead of air. In the cabin, Page's voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're diverting to Des Moines due to a medical emergency. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes. 6,000 pounds of fuel. One engine fighting ice. One overwhelmed pilot. And weather that was getting worse, not better. Kesha opened her tablet. The cracked screen glowed blue in the dim cabin light. She pulled up the aviation weather app, professional-grade subscription-based, the kind commercial pilots used, and zoomed to Des Moines. The meter was updating in real-time. KDSM 012356Z, 18025G38KT, 1F4SM, plus RA, BR, OVC02. Harold leaned over, saw the screen, saw the abbreviations he'd spent 3 decades learning to decode. Winds 180 at 25 knots, gusting to 38. Visibility 1/4 mile. Heavy rain, mist, overcast ceiling at 200 feet. "That's minimums," he said quietly. Keisha nodded. Didn't look at him, just stared at the numbers. "Can they land in that?" "Legally, yes, if everything works." She scrolled down. "If the ILS is functioning, if the approach lights are visible at decision height, if the pilot doesn't make a mistake. And if things don't work," Keisha's jaw tightened, "then we divert to the alternate. But look," she pulled up Omaha, the nearest alternate airport. Harold read the weather data and felt his chest constrict. Coma 012355Z, 2028 G42KT, 188SM, plus TSRA, FG, OVC01, worse. Visibility 1/8 mile. Thunderstorms, fog, ceiling 100 feet, below minimums, legally impossible to attempt. "What about Kansas City?" Harold asked. Kesha checked, shook her head. 600 miles. We don't have the fuel. They were committed. Des Moines or nothing. Land in weather that was barely legal with a pilot who'd never done a solo approach in conditions like this, or run out of fuel trying to find somewhere better. In the cabin, Page's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we're diverting to Des Moines due to a medical emergency. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes. 6,000 pounds of fuel. One engine fighting ice. One overwhelmed pilot. And weather that was getting worse, not better. Kesha opened her tablet. The cracked screen glowed blue in the dim cabin light. She pulled up the aviation weather app, professional-grade subscription-based, the kind commercial pilots used, and zoomed to Des Moines. The meter was updating in real-time KDSM 0123560 18025G38KT 104SM plus RA BR OVC02. Harold leaned over, saw the screen, saw the abbreviations he'd spent 3 decades learning to decode. Winds 180 at 25 knots gusting to 38. Visibility 1/4 mile. Heavy rain. Mist. Overcast ceiling at 200 feet. That's minimums, he said quietly. Keisha nodded. Didn't look at him, just stared at the numbers. Can they land in that? Legally, yes. If everything works, she scrolled down. If the ILS is functioning, if the approach lights are visible at decision height, if the pilot doesn't make a mistake, and if things don't work, Keisha's jaw tightened. Then we divert to the alternate. But look. She pulled up Omaha, the nearest alternate airport. Harold read the weather data and felt his chest constrict. Coma 0123555Z 2002 HG42KT 18SM plus TSRA FG OVC01 worse. Visibility 1/8 mile. Thunderstorms, fog, ceiling 100 feet, below minimums, legally impossible to attempt. What about Kansas City? Harold asked. Kesha checked, shook her head. 600 miles. We don't have the fuel. They were committed. Des Moines or nothing. Land in weather that was barely legal with a pilot who'd never done a solo approach in conditions like this. Or run out of fuel trying to find somewhere better. Akrinati. Word count 445 words. Buok 8 mini payoff no. Trisuri film butter 400 stu. Shijwo word trigabidis nipis frigipalade hot chi yuan. The descent was brutal. Not just uncomfortable, genuinely violent. The plane bucked and rolled through cloud layers so dense they looked solid rain hammering the fuselage with the sound of continuous thunder. Every 100 feet felt earned, fought for. At 15,000 feet, the turbulence hit a crescendo. The plane dropped 300 feet in 4 seconds, a fall so sudden that loose items became projectiles and stomachs lurched into throats. Someone vomited. The sound was wet and immediate and set off a chain reaction, 3 more passengers losing their lunch into air sickness bags or laps or the gaps between seats. Tara's voice over the intercom, tight with stress. Flight attendants prepare for descent. We're expecting a rough ride all the way down. She was fighting the controls now. Not dramatically, just constant tiny inputs. Corrections wrestling with an aircraft that wanted to do anything except what she told it to. The autopilot had disconnected twice, overwhelmed by wind shear that exceeded its programming limits. Her descent rate was too aggressive, 1,800 feet per minute. She knew it was too fast, but the turbulence made precise control nearly impossible, and she needed to get below the worst of the weather before Tara. Dr. Reed's voice, sharp, medical. You're descending too fast. You're going to overshoot your altitude. I'm trying. You need to reduce rate of descent, 1,000 feet per minute, no more. I can't hold it steady. In 8. Keisha's hands gripped the armrests. She listened to the engine sounds, felt the angle of descent through her body, counted seconds between turbulence peaks. 1,800 feet per minute in weather like this was dangerous. You hit wind shear on the way down, a sudden increase in headwind followed by tailwind, and that descent rate would spike to 3,000 before you could react. Drop through your assigned altitude, bust minimums, maybe hit something you couldn't see. She couldn't sit anymore. She unbuckled, stood. Harold grabbed her wrist. "What are you doing?" "Something." She pulled free, moved into the aisle. Page appeared, instantly hand out. "Ma'am, you need to—" "Tell her to reduce descent rate to 1,000 feet per minute." Keisha's voice was flat. Command, not request. "She's too aggressive. She'll lose control." "Who are you to tell her?" Page stared. Something in Keisha's eyes made the decision. She grabbed the intercom phone. "Cockpit passenger suggests reducing descent rate to 1,000 feet per minute. Says current rate is too aggressive for conditions." Silence. Then Tara's voice thin with exhaustion. "Who said that?" "Passenger in 8A. Longer silence. Then, "Roger. Reducing rate." The nose came up slightly. The descent smoothed. Not by much. The turbulence was still brutal, but the character changed. More controlled. Less desperate. 60 seconds later, they passed through 13,000 feet, and the turbulence suddenly eased. Not gone, just less. They dropped below the worst of it. Tara's voice again this time, with something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you to whoever suggested that. It helped." Grant Harlan's face pressed against the window, said nothing. Richard Moss had stopped filming. Brad Simmons stared at Kesha like she'd just done something impossible. Kesha sat back down, buckled in. Her hands were shaking again. They were at 12,000 feet, 22 miles from Des Moines, when the next alarm screamed through the cockpit. Not a chirp this time. Not a polite electronic reminder. A full-throated klaxon that meant catastrophic failure in progress. ENG-2, fire. Tara's hands flew across the panel memory, training every drill she'd done in the simulator, suddenly real and immediate. Pull the fire handle, cut fuel flow, discharge the fire bottle. Textbook response executed in 4 seconds. The fire warning light went dark. The engine was dead now. Completely. No thrust, no power, just dead weight hanging off the right wing. Single engine operation on a 767 in severe weather, with an approach to minimums coming up in 8 minutes. Des Moines Tower United 4387. Tara's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "Engine failure. Right engine shut down. Single engine. I need—" Her voice broke completely. "I need help. I can't do a single engine approach in this weather. I don't have the experience." The controller's voice stayed calm. Professionally, impossibly calm. United 4387. Understand single engine. Be advised we're vectors to ILS runway 13. Emergency equipment is standing by. Are you able to continue approach? Was she able? Tara looked at the instruments, at the weather, at Captain Martinez, still unconscious beside her, at her own hands shaking on the yoke. "I don't know," she whispered. Page's voice filled the cabin, stripped of everything except raw desperation. "If there is anyone with experience flying multi-engine aircraft, we need you in the cockpit right now. This is not optional. If you have any experience, you need to identify yourself immediately." Keisha stood. Grant Harlan shot to his feet. "No, we already decided. That was before we lost an engine." Harold Peterson was up to blocking Grant. "Let her try. She's been shaking the entire flight. She's not stable." Brad Simmons. "I vote no. We need someone qualified." Richard Moss. "This is insanity. I'm documenting this entire disaster. Everyone shut up." Dr. Reed's voice cut through. She stood in the cockpit doorway, stethoscope still around her neck, face flushed with anger and fear. "We have one engine, one pilot who's drowning in weather that's trying to kill us. I don't care if she's shaking. I don't care if she's wearing rags. If she knows how to fly, we need her right now." Grant stepped into the aisle, blocked Kesha's path. "I demand a formal vote. Everyone who opposes her taking control, raise your hand." Hands shot up. 15, 20, more. A sea of raised hands and frightened faces voting against the woman who looked like she couldn't handle stress. "There," Grant pointed at her. "The passengers have spoken. Sit down before you make this worse." The plane yawed hard to the right, asymmetric thrust from the single remaining engine. Tara overcorrected. They rolled 15 degrees before she caught it. 8 minutes to runway, the controller said. United 4387. "What are your intentions?" Tara's voice barely audible. I don't think I can make it." Keisha stood in the aisle, surrounded by people who decided she was worthless, staring at the cockpit door, at the choice between respecting their vote and watching 200 people die because she didn't fight back. Her right hand trembled, the tremor that everyone saw as weakness, the tremor that was actually nerve damage from pulling 9 Gs in a fighter jet during a training accident that had ended her career and nearly ended her life. Inside her hoodie pocket, her fingers found the challenge coin she carried everywhere. Round, heavy, metal. Engraved with words she hadn't earned the right to say out loud in 5 years. Spectre Squadron Air Combat Command. She looked at Grant Harlan, at Brad Simmons, at Richard Moss filming everything. Then she looked at Harold Peterson, at Dr. Reed, at Paige, who was watching her with an expression that said please. The plane shuddered. 6 minutes to runway. 5,000 pounds of fuel. 1 engine. 1 dying pilot. And 200 people who'd rather die than let someone who looked broken touch the controls. Drop a comment right now. Do you think she should take control, or is the crowd right to stop her? Let me know what you'd do in this situation. Keisha's hand closed around the challenge coin. The plane dropped again, and in the distance, barely visible through the rain-streaked window, the lights of Des Moines appeared. 6 minutes. 1 choice. Everything on the line. Keisha didn't ask permission this time. She moved. Not fast, drew attention, created resistance. She moved with the deliberate economy of someone who'd learned that authority came from competence, not volume. 3 steps down the aisle. Past Grant Harlan, who opened his mouth to protest. Past Brad Simmons, who reached out but didn't quite touch her. Past Richard Moss, whose phone tracked her movement but whose hand dropped slowly, uncertainty replacing righteousness. Paige stepped aside. Didn't block the cockpit door, just opened it and let Keisha through. The cockpit was smaller than Kesha remembered cockpits being. More cramped, more cluttered. Commercial jets weren't built for combat efficiency. They were built for 2 pilots' long hauls and comfort over months of repetitive operations. But the fundamentals were the same. Stick, throttle, instruments, physics. Tara Johnson looked up from the controls. Tears streaked her face, mascara smudged, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. 28 years old and 800 hours suddenly looked like a child playing dress-up in a uniform she hadn't earned. "I can't do this," Tara whispered. "I can't." "You can." Keisha slid into the right seat first officer position. Her hands found the yoke automatically. Muscle memory. But you don't have to do it alone. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been here before." Kesha scanned the instruments. Altitude 11,200 feet. Heading 130. Airspeed 220 knots. Single engine left only throttle at 87%. Fuel 4,900 pounds. "What's your name?" "Tara. Tara Johnson." "Okay, Tara, I'm Kesha. I need you to listen very carefully. We're going to land this airplane, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Tara stared. "Have you flown a 767 before?" "No." The hope in Tara's eyes flickered. "Then how?" "I've flown jets with 1 engine before. Different airframe. Same principles. Physics doesn't change. Keisha's hands moved across the panel, checking switches, verifying configurations, reading the systems the way someone reads Braille. By touch, by instinct. Right now, I need you to do exactly what I say. Can you do that? The passengers, they voted against you. The passengers aren't flying this plane. We are. Keisha's voice dropped, went flat. Command tone. The voice that had once ordered wingmen through surface-to-air missile engagement zones. Tara, look at me. Tara turned. Met Keisha's eyes. Do you want to live? Yes. Then reduce thrust to 70%. Right now. But we'll lose airspeed. Do it! Tara's hand moved to the throttle. Pulled back. The engine sound changed quieter, less urgent. The airspeed bled off. 220, 210, 200. The plane stopped yawing right, stopped fighting. The asymmetric thrust had been pulling them off course, forcing Tara to hold constant right rudder just to maintain heading. At lower power, the imbalance decreased. Now trim. Keisha pointed to the trim wheel. Nose up, 2 degrees. Tara adjusted. The yoke pressure eased. The plane's nose rose slightly, and suddenly it wasn't a battle anymore, just controlled flight. Better? Keisha asked. Tara nodded, couldn't speak, just nodded. Good. Now listen. We're going to fly this approach together. I'll call the commands. You'll execute them. You know this airplane better than I do. You know the procedures, but I know how to land on one engine in weather you can't see through. Understood. Understood. Okay. Keisha keyed the radio. Her voice stayed calm, neutral. No emotion, just facts. Des Moines approach, United 4387. Request vectors for ILS runway 13. The controller responded immediately. United 4387 fly heading 110. Descend and maintain 4000. Expect ILS runway 13 approach. Altimeter 2987. Heading 110 4000 altimeter 2987. United 4387. Tara started the turn. Keisha watched the instruments made small corrections. Shallower. You're overbanking. We don't have the power to recover from steep turns right now. Copy. The plane rolled gently. Settled on heading 110. The turbulence had eased slightly. They were below 10,000 feet now, out of the worst convective activity. Still rough, still dangerous, but manageable. Behind them, Dr. Reed checked Captain Martinez's vitals. He's stable. Unconscious, but stable. He'll survive if we get him to a hospital. We will. Keisha didn't look back. Didn't break focus. Tara, start your descent. 1,000 feet per minute. No more. Roger. The nose dropped. The altimeter began unwinding. Outside rain hammered the windscreen visibility near zero. They were flying entirely on instruments now. No visual references. Just numbers and needles and faith in physics. In the cabin, Grant Harlan sat rigid in his seat. He'd watched Keisha disappear into the cockpit, watched the plane stop fighting, felt the descent smooth out. He said nothing. Richard Moss had lowered his phone. Brad Simmons stared at the bulkhead jaw working. Harold Peterson caught Paige's eye, nodded once. She knows what she's doing. Paige nodded back, but nobody celebrated. Not yet. They still had to land. And the hardest part was coming. At 8,000 feet, Keisha reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out the challenge coin, set it on the center console between the seats where Tara could see it. Round, heavy, bronze with black enamel, engraved with an eagle clutching lightning bolts. Words circling the edge, Spectre Squadron F-16, Viper Air Combat Command. Tara glanced down. Did a double take. That's your Air Force was. Keisha's hands stayed on the yoke, eyes on instruments. Long time ago. Fighter pilot. Yes. How long? 6 years active duty, 1,200 hours, F-16C, Block 50. Keisha's voice stayed flat, reciting facts. Medical discharge 2019. Reason code G-low-C susceptibility. They said I couldn't be trusted in high-G environments anymore. G-lock. Tara's medical training kicked in. Gravity-induced loss of consciousness. Training accident. Pulled 9 Gs in a defensive spiral. Blacked out for 4 seconds. Long enough to lose 2,000 feet of altitude. Recovered on my own, but the damage was done. Vascular issue. Pre-existing condition I didn't know I had. Makes me vulnerable to syncope under sustained G-force. The shaking. Nerve damage from the incident. Gets worse under stress. But it doesn't affect fine motor control. Just looks bad. Keisha adjusted trim voice, never changing tone. The passengers saw weakness. They were wrong. But I understand why they thought what they did. Tara stared at the coin. At Keisha. At the instruments that were suddenly reading more stable than they had in 30 minutes. Why didn't you say something earlier? Would they have believed me? Tara thought about Grant Harlan, Brad Simmons, the vote. 20 hands raised against this woman because she wore a worn hoodie and shook when people yelled. Probably not, Tara admitted. Then it didn't matter. Keisha keyed the radio again. Des Moines approach United 4387. Request confirmation. Does anyone on frequency recognize call sign Spectre 7? Silence. 5 seconds. 10. Then a different voice came through, older, deeper, with a Texas drawl that carried weight. United 4387, this is Colonel Hayes, 132nd Operations. Did you say Spectre 7? Affirmative. Authentication code Tango X-Ray 29er. Longer pause. The sound of keyboard clicks in the background. Then, authentication confirmed. Lieutenant Keisha Washington, call sign Spectre, 7 Shaw, Air Force Base. Inactive status since November 2019. Medical discharge. The colonel's voice changed, respect bleeding through radio protocol. Lieutenant, are you currently at the controls of United 4387? Affirmative. First officer is pilot flying. I'm advising. What's your status? Single engine, low fuel, pilot incapacitated. First officer has limited experience. Weather is at minimums. We need vectors in priority. You've got it. Des Moines Tower is clearing the airspace now. You'll have the runway to yourself. Emergency equipment standing by. A pause. Lieutenant, it's good to hear your voice again. Thank you, sir. The transmission ended. Tara looked at Keisha with new eyes. You're military. Was. Decorated. That doesn't matter right now. Keisha pointed to the display. 6 miles to final approach course. Start configuring. Flaps 5. Tara reached for the flap lever. Extended the first notch. The plane's nose wanted to pitch up increased lift from the wing camber. She countered with trim. Good, Keisha said. Speed 200 knots. Descend to 3,000. In the cabin, Harold Peterson had been listening through the intercom. Paige had accidentally left it on, and now the entire conversation with Colonel Hayes was playing over the cabin speakers. People heard the authentication, heard the call sign, heard Lieutenant and Shaw Air Force Base, and decorated. Grant Harlan's face went pale. Brad Simmons looked like he'd been punched. Richard Moss stared at his phone at the videos he'd recorded and slowly, deliberately deleted them. Harold stood up, spoke loud enough for the cabin to hear. That woman you all voted against. She's a fighter pilot, F-16, 1,200 hours, and right now, she's the only reason we're still in the air. Silence. The woman in 8B, the one who'd grabbed Keisha's arm in fear, put her head in her hands and started crying. Grant said nothing, just sat there staring at his hands at the watch that suddenly felt heavy at the spreadsheet on his laptop that meant nothing at all. The plane descended through 5,000 feet, 4 miles to final approach course. Keisha's right hand still trembled on the yoke, but nobody was looking at her hands anymore. They were looking at the coin on the center console. at the proof they'd dismissed, at the credibility they'd voted against, and realizing too late that judgment based on appearance had almost killed them all. The radio crackled again. This time, it was Des Moines Tower, the controller, who'd been handling them since the emergency declaration. His voice had changed. Less procedural, more human. United 4387 Tower, we've been advised of your situation. Lieutenant Washington, we're honored to have you on frequency. We're rolling out every piece of equipment we have. Runway 13 will be yours exclusively. No traffic within 10 miles. Weather is still showing ceiling 200 visibility 1/4, but we've got the approach lights on maximum intensity. Appreciate that. Kesha's voice stayed level, professional. United 4387. Colonel Hayes came back on frequency. Lieutenant, I'm patching in Shaw Operations. Someone wants to talk to you. A new voice, female, sharp. Familiar enough that Keisha's hands tightened on the yoke for half a second before she forced them to relax. Spectre 7, this is Razor 3. You still remember the emergency descent profile from Red Flag 2017. Keisha closed her eyes briefly. Red Flag, the premier Air Force combat exercise, 2017. She'd been there. She'd flown missions where single-engine landings in bad weather were simulated failures designed to separate competent pilots from exceptional ones. She'd aced everyone. Affirmative, Razor 3, I remember. Good, because what you're about to do is the same thing, just bigger and slower. You've got this. Roger. The transmission ended. Tara looked at Kesha. Who was that? Someone I used to fly with. Keisha's jaw tightened. Someone who knows what I'm capable of, even when I'm not sure anymore. 4,000 feet. 3 miles from the outer marker. Rain still hammering. Lightning still strobing. But the turbulence had eased to moderate chop, uncomfortable, but controllable. In the cabin, Harold Peterson stood in the aisle, gripping seatbacks for balance. He raised his voice to carry over the engine noise. I spent 30 years maintaining F-15s. I know pilots. I know the real ones from the pretenders. He looked around at the passengers. That woman up there, she's real. And everyone who voted against her needs to understand something. You almost killed us with your prejudice. Dr. Reed emerged from the cockpit. She'd been monitoring Captain Martinez, but she'd also been watching Kesha work. She's been giving instructions for the last 10 minutes. Precise, calm, textbook emergency procedure. The first officer is following her lead, and the plane is stable for the first time since the captain collapsed. If anyone still doubts her, you're welcome to check the flight data recorder after we land. Grant Harlan finally spoke. His voice was small, stripped of authority. I was wrong. He looked around the cabin, meeting eyes that had once agreed with him. I judged her based on nothing, on clothes, on appearance. And I almost got us all killed because I couldn't see past my own prejudice. Richard Moss, the attorney who'd filmed everything, cleared his throat. I deleted the videos, all of them. What I documented wasn't evidence of negligence. It was evidence of my own bias. I'm sorry. Brad Simmons said nothing, just sat with his head in his hands, veteran's ball cap, askew, the weight of his false authority crushing him from the inside. The woman in 8B, the one who'd sat beside Kesha for 2 hours without knowing who she was, spoke through tears. I grabbed her arm when I was scared. She told me we'd be okay. She was calm when I was panicking. And then I raised my hand to vote against her. She looked toward the cockpit. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Paige Scott moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts, preparing for landing. But she paused beside 8A, the empty seat where Keisha had sat in silence, while passengers decided she was worthless. She picked up the worn duffel bag, held it carefully, like it contained something precious. Because now they all knew it did. 2,000 feet, 1 mile from final approach course. The hardest part was coming. At 2,000 feet, Tara's voice went tight again. Kesha, we have a problem. What problem? ILS glide slope is unreliable. I'm getting intermittent signal. It keeps dropping out. Kesha looked at the display. The glide slope indicator, the vertical guidance that told them if they were on the correct descent path, was fluctuating. 1 second it showed they were on profile. The next, it showed full-scale deflection, like they were 1,000 feet too high or too low. Lightning damage, Kesha said. The ground equipment is probably fine. The receiver on the aircraft is fried. Can we still land? Yes, but not with vertical guidance. We'll have to fly a localizer-only approach. Tara's face paled. I've never done one of those in actual conditions, only in the sim. Then this is good practice. Kesha's tone stayed matter-of-fact. Localizer gives us lateral guidance, keeps us aligned with the runway centerline. We'll calculate our own descent profile. Basic math. 1,000 feet for every 3 miles. We're 6 miles out, need to be at the runway at 0. So we need to be at 2,000 feet right now. Tara checked the altimeter. We're at 1,900. Close enough. Start your descent, 600 feet per minute. No more. I'll call altitudes. You fly. Okay. Tara's hands were shaking now. Not tremor, pure fear. Okay. The radio. United 4387. You are 1 mile from Jolt's the final approach fix. Turn right, heading 130. Cleared ILS runway, 13 approach. Contact tower on 118.7. Right to 130 cleared approach. Tower 1187. United 4387. Tara switched frequencies. Des Moines Tower, United 4387, with you on the ILS 13. United 4387, Des Moines Tower. Wind 180 at 25, gusting 35. Runway 13 cleared to land. Emergency equipment is in position. Cleared to land United 4387. They intercepted the final approach course. The localizer needle centered. Kesha called out, on course, descent rate 600, flaps 15. Tara extended more flaps. The plane slowed, dragged. Single engine meant every configuration change affected performance more dramatically. Speed 160, on profile. Altitude 1,500. 1 mile from the runway. Still no visibility, just rain and darkness and the glow of instruments. Behind them, Dr. Reed braced against the bulkhead. Captain Martinez was secured in his seat oxygen mask, unstable but unconscious. If this went wrong, he'd never know. In the cabin, 212 passengers sat in silence. No crying now, no panic. Just the terrible quiet of people who understood they were seconds from either survival or catastrophe and had no control over which. Grant Harlan gripped his armrests. The Patek Philippe on his wrist felt obscene now. A $40,000 watch on a man who'd almost killed people because he couldn't see past a worn hoodie. Harold Peterson prayed, not words, just feeling. The formless prayer of someone who'd lived long enough to know that some things were beyond human control. Altitude 1,000. Kesha's voice, steady. On course, speed 155, half a mile. Minimums, Tara's voice cracked. We're at minimums. I don't see the runway. FAA regulations were clear. If you reached decision height, in this case 200 feet above the runway, and didn't have visual contact, you had to execute a missed approach. Pull up, go around, try again, or divert. But they didn't have fuel for another attempt. Barely had fuel for this one. Stay on instruments, Kesha said. I'm looking outside. She leaned forward, pressed her face close to the windscreen. Rain hammered the glass. Lightning strobed. Darkness everywhere. 400 feet, she called. On course. On speed. Tara's hands were white-knuckled on the yoke. I have to pull up if we don't see it. Not yet. Kesha, Not yet. 300 feet. The plane was committed now, too low to safely climb away with one engine and full flaps. If they pulled up, they'd be climbing at 200 feet per minute, maybe. In wind shear, they might not climb at all. They were landing whether they saw the runway or not. 250 feet, Kesha's voice. Still calm. Impossibly calm. Still on course. I can't see anything, Tara's voice rising toward panic. Trust the instruments. Fly the needles. 200 feet. Minimums. Regulations said pull up. Physics said they couldn't. Kesha stared into the rain, saw nothing. Nothing. And then a flicker. Red. Brief. Approach lights. Barely visible through the rain, but there. Runway in sight. Keisha's voice sharp. Command. Continue. You're on profile. Hold what you have. I see it. Tara's voice broke with relief and terror mixed. I see the lights. 150 feet. The runway environment materialized out of the darkness like a photograph developing. Red lights. White lights. The black stripe of pavement glistening wet. On speed. On course. Flare in 5 seconds. 100 feet. Keisha's right hand moved to the throttle, hovering ready to shove it forward if Tara pulled back too early and ballooned. 50 feet. Flare. Now. Tara pulled back gently. The nose rose. The sink rate decreased. 20 feet, 10. The main wheels kissed pavement. The landing wasn't gentle. It was firm, a controlled impact that compressed the struts and made the airframe groan. But it was on centerline, on speed, in control. The spoilers deployed automatically panels rising from the wings to kill lift. The remaining engine roared into reverse thrust. The anti-skid system pulsed the brakes, preventing the wheels from locking on the rain-slick runway. They were down, decelerating, alive. Tara's hand stayed locked on the controls knuckles, white every muscle rigid. Keisha reached over, placed her hand on top of Tara's. Ease off the brakes. Let the reversers do the work. We've got 5,000 feet of runway. No hurry. Tara nodded. Couldn't speak. Just nodded. The plane slowed. 4,000 feet remaining. 3,000. 2,000. Down to taxi speed. The emergency equipment followed them. Fire trucks. Ambulances. Their lights strobing red and blue through the rain. Nice job, Keisha said quietly. You kept it together. I would have pulled up at minimums. Tara's voice shook. I would have gone around. We'd have run out of fuel. But you didn't. You trusted me. That's why we're here. The plane rolled to a stop. Tara set the parking brake. Her hands fell from the yoke. She sat motionless, staring at the windscreen where rain still hammered, processing the fact that she'd just done something she never thought she was capable of. Behind them, Dr. Reed moved immediately to Captain Martinez. We need to get him off first. Paramedics are standing by. Kesha stood, stepped aside. Let the professionals do their work. She turned toward the cabin. Through the open cockpit door, she could see faces. 212 people staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, shame, awe, relief. She walked into the aisle. The cabin was silent, except for the sound of rain on the fuselage and the muted voices of emergency responders outside. Harold Peterson was the first to stand. He looked at her. Didn't say anything. Just nodded once the way veterans acknowledged each other when words weren't enough. Dr. Reed emerged from the cockpit, stopped beside Kesha. That was the most precise approach I've ever seen. No wasted motion, no hesitation. You saved every person on this aircraft. Tara saved us, Kesha said. I just talked her through it. No, Dr. Reed's voice was firm. You did more than talk. You commanded. You led. That's different. Grant Harlan stood, walked toward Keisha, stopped 3 feet away, maintaining distance like he didn't deserve to come closer. I owe you my life, and an apology that no words will ever adequately convey. I judged you based on prejudice and nearly killed everyone because of it. Keisha looked at him, saw the genuine shame, the weight of realization. You weren't wrong to be scared. You were wrong to assume competence and appearance are the same thing. I know that now. Grant's voice cracked. I just wish I'd known it an hour ago. Brad Simmons stood next, removed his veteran's ball cap, held it against his chest. I told everyone you weren't capable. I used my military service as authority to discredit you. I'm ashamed of what I did. You wanted to protect people, Kesha said. I understand that impulse. It wasn't protection. It was ego. Brad's face flushed. I wasn't good enough to do what you just did. Never was. And I couldn't handle seeing someone better than me, so I tore you down. Richard Moss stepped forward. Couldn't meet her eyes. I documented everything, thinking I was building a legal case. I was just building evidence of my own bigotry. I'm sorry. Kesha said nothing. Just stood there, right hand still trembling slightly, hoodie soaked with stress sweat, looking exhausted and wrung out, and somehow still dignified. The woman from 8B pushed through, tears streaming. You told me we'd be okay. I didn't believe you. Then I voted against you. But you saved me anyway. Why? Keisha thought about that, about the 5 years since medical discharge, about the countless times people had looked at her and seen only what they wanted to see, about the choice between bitterness and grace. Because your life has value, she said simply, whether you believed in me or not. The woman broke down sobbing. Paige Scott appeared at the cabin door. The jet bridge was connecting. Emergency personnel were boarding paramedics with stretchers, firefighters with equipment, airport officials with clipboards. We need to evacuate, Paige announced. Medical first, then rose from front to back. Stay calm. Take nothing with you. We're safe now. The passengers began moving. Slowly. Orderly. Nobody pushed. Nobody panicked. They'd been through enough panic for one day. As they filed past, Keisha Several reached out, touched her shoulder, her arm. Brief contact that said, thank you without requiring words. Harold Peterson paused beside her, extended his hand. Lieutenant, it was an honor. Kesha shook it. I'm not a lieutenant anymore. You'll always be a lieutenant to those of us who know what that means. He held her gaze. And what you did today, that wasn't just flying. That was leadership under fire, the kind they give medals for. I didn't do it for medals. I know. That's why you earned one. He moved on. The cabin emptied. Captain Martinez was loaded onto a stretcher, conscious now, disoriented, but stable. Tara followed him out, staying close, her hand on his arm, like she couldn't bear to let him out of her sight. Finally, only Kesha remained. She stood in the empty cabin, looked at seat 8A. At the exit row she'd chosen deliberately, because old habits didn't die. Picked up her duffel bag from where Paige had placed it carefully on the seat, and walked toward the exit. Outside, rain still fell. Emergency lights still strobed. But the wind had eased. The storm was passing. She descended the stairs slowly, feet on solid ground for the first time in 3 hours. It felt strange, too stable, too permanent. A figure waited at the bottom. Military uniform, Air Force blues, full colonel insignia. Colonel Hayes. He saluted, sharp, crisp. The formal acknowledgement between officers that transcended rank and recognized only competence. Keisha returned it. Muscle memory. The salute she'd thought she'd never give again. Lieutenant Washington, Hayes said. That was outstanding airmanship. I've already contacted Shaw. They're reviewing your case. Medical discharge based on 2019 protocols doesn't apply under current standards. The Air Force made a mistake. We'd like to correct it. Kesha looked at him, at the uniform, at the possibility of returning to the life she'd thought was over. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. Hayes handed her a card. My direct line. When you're ready, call. We'll talk about what comes next. She took the card, slipped it into her pocket beside the challenge coin, walked toward the terminal. Alone, exhausted, but not broken. Not anymore. The terminal was chaos media vans, cameras reporters, shouting questions that nobody answered. Airport security had cordoned off the area, but phones were out videos uploading social media already exploding with fragments of the story. Keisha walked through it like a ghost, hood up, head down, invisible again. Paige Scott intercepted her before she reached the exit. Keisha, wait. She stopped, turned. Paige held out the duffel bag she'd been carrying it. You forgot this. Thanks. Also, Paige's voice dropped. The airline wants to talk to you. They're offering, well, everything. Compensation, job offers. They want you to consider flying for them. I can't pass a flight physical. They said they'd work with you. New medical standards, accommodations, whatever it takes. Paige paused. You saved 200 lives today. They know what that's worth. Kesha looked at the bag, at the coin still in her pocket, at the card from Colonel Hayes. Tell them I'll think about it. Okay. Paige hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were from the start? You could have avoided all of this. Keisha thought about that. About 5 years of being invisible. About learning that credentials didn't matter if people had already decided you were worthless. Because I wanted to see if they'd let me help, based on what I could do, not who I used to be. She adjusted the duffel strap. Turns out people need to see the uniform before they trust the person wearing it. That's not fair. No, but it's real. Tara Johnson appeared moving fast, still in uniform, but rumpled. Kesha, she turned. Tara stopped breathless. I just talked to the FAA. They're reviewing the cockpit voice recorder. They want to use this as a case study. Single engine approach in minimum weather. Perfect execution. They're saying it's textbook emergency procedure. You did well, Kesha said. I followed your lead. I would have crashed without you. Tara's voice dropped. The airline offered me a check ride upgrade to captain. They said anyone who can handle what I just handled is ready. But I told them the truth, I didn't handle it. You did, so I'm recommending they offer you the position instead. Tara, I mean it. I'll stay first officer until I actually earn captain. But you've already earned it 1,000 times over. Behind them, Harold Peterson approached with Dr. Reed. The veteran extended a folded piece of paper. Names and numbers. Everyone from the flight who wants to stay in touch. 37 people so far. They want to thank you properly when the shock wears off. Dr. Reed added, Captain Martinez is stable. They're taking him to surgery, stent placement routine. He'll make a full recovery. He asked me to tell you thank you. Said he's been flying 30 years and never saw anyone handle an emergency with that much composure. Kesha took the paper, looked at the names. Strangers who judged her then needed her. Then realized what they'd almost thrown away. Tell him he's welcome. She walked toward the exit, pushed through the doors. Rain had stopped, sky clearing, stars visible through breaking clouds. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Lieutenant Washington, this is Razor 3. Proud of you. You proved today that being grounded doesn't mean you stop flying. Major Chen. Keisha stared at the message. At the acknowledgement from someone who'd flown beside her, who knew her capabilities before the medical discharge, who'd believed in her when she'd stopped believing in herself. She typed back, Thank you. Good to hear from you. Another buzz. Colonel Hayes. Media wants interviews. I can run interference if you want privacy. Your call. She replied, Privacy. Not ready for that yet. Understood. Offer stands. Call when ready. She pocketed the phone, started walking. The airport parking lot stretched out before her rental cars, shuttles, taxis. normal life resuming after crisis. But she wasn't the same person who'd boarded that flight in Denver. That woman had been hiding, running, pretending 5 years of silence could erase what she'd been. This woman, the one walking through rain-slick pavement with a worn duffel and trembling hands, had just proven that you didn't stop being a pilot because someone took your wings. You stopped being a pilot when you forgot how to fly. And she remembered. Shaw Air Force Base, November 2019. Clear skies, training mission. Keisha had been inverted at 12,000 feet when the G-lock hit. 9G sustained through a defensive spiral simulated SAM evasion. She'd done it 100 times, knew her limits, stayed within them. Except this time, her vision grayed, tunneled, then went black. 4 seconds of unconsciousness. 4 seconds where the F-16 rolled wings level and nosed down, heading for the ground at 400 knots. She woke up at 2,000 feet, pulled out, recovered, landed. Didn't tell anyone until the flight surgeon noticed her pupils during post-flight medical. The diagnosis: pre-existing vascular condition, carotid artery compression under high G loads, insufficient blood flow to the brain, survivable in training, potentially fatal in combat. The medical board's decision: permanent disqualification, medical discharge. Thank you for your service. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. She'd argued, appealed, provided evidence that she could manage the condition with physical countermeasures, muscle tensing techniques that maintained blood pressure. They said no, said the risk was unacceptable, said they couldn't trust her in combat when 4 seconds of unconsciousness could mean losing a $50 million aircraft or worse, civilian casualties if she crashed over populated areas. She'd turned in her wings, packed her gear, walked away from the only life she'd ever wanted, and spent 5 years pretending she was okay with being invisible. Present. Des Moines Terminal. Keisha staring at her reflection in a rain-streaked window. The flashback faded. She touched her wrist, the scar from where they'd installed monitors during medical evaluation. Hardware to track her vitals during high G exposure. Proof that her body betrayed her when she needed it most. But today, at 200 feet above a rain-soaked runway, with 200 lives depending on her, her body hadn't betrayed anything. It had remembered. Every procedure, every calculation, every moment of training that muscle memory preserved even when official records said she was unfit. They'd taken her wings, but they couldn't take what she'd learned, couldn't erase the 1,000 hours she'd spent learning to read sky and metal and physics, couldn't make her forget how to fly. Keisha sat in the airport Starbucks 24 hours later with a coffee she hadn't touched and a tablet showing news headlines she wasn't reading. Her hands still shook. Worse now than during the flight. Adrenaline debt. The body's way of reminding her that miracles had costs. A woman approached. Mid-50s gray hair, kind eyes. "Excuse me, are you Kesha Washington?" Kesha looked up, nodded. "I'm Sarah Chen. My daughter was on that flight. Row 12, she's 19, studying engineering at Northwestern." Sarah's voice cracked. "Because of you, I get to see her graduate. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but thank you." She left before Keisha could respond. Left behind a business card and tears Keisha didn't know how to process. Grant Harlan had published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Title: "I almost killed 200 people with my prejudice." The piece was brutal self-examination. No excuses, no hedging, just honest acknowledgement of bias and its consequences. Richard Moss had contacted the ACLU, donated $50,000 to organizations fighting discrimination. Not publicity anonymous donation that leaked only because someone at the organization recognized his name. Brad Simmons had quietly removed veteran from his social media bios, stopped telling stories, started listening instead. The FAA issued new guidance. Passenger capability assessments in exit rows shall not be based on appearance dress or perceived economic status. Airlines must rely solely on verbal confirmation of willingness and physical ability. United Airlines revised training protocols. Added scenarios where unconventional candidates provided critical assistance. Shaw Air Force Base reopened Keisha's file. Medical board scheduled for review. The video someone had filmed the landing from the terminal went viral. 20 million views in 48 hours. Comments section split between people praising her competence and people shocked that passengers had voted against her. Hashtag trending, judge. The hoodie think pieces. Editorials. Congressional inquiries into military medical discharge policies. Pilots' forums exploded. Thousands of commercial and military aviators dissecting the approach, the decisions, the execution. Consensus, near-perfect emergency response. One comment upvoted 16,000 times. She flew a single-engine approach to minimums in a plane she'd never touched before and greased the landing. That's not luck. That's mastery. Keisha's phone wouldn't stop. Interview requests, job offers, speaking engagements. She turned them all down because the thing nobody understood was this: she hadn't done it for recognition. She'd done it because 200 people needed someone to remember how to fly, and she was the only one who could. And now that it was over that the adrenaline had faded and the headlines had moved on, she was left with the same question she'd been asking for 5 years. Who are you when nobody's watching? The answer used to be nobody. Now she wasn't sure. 72 hours later. Keisha stood at the window of a hotel room in Des Moines, watching planes take off from the airport she'd nearly died approaching. The tremor in her right hand had settled into its familiar rhythm, present, persistent, proof that some damage was permanent. Her phone showed 3 unread messages. Colonel Hayes, medical board meets Thursday. Your presence requested, but not required. Decision will be based on current standards, not 2019 protocols. Tara Johnson. Coffee sometime, I'd like to learn from you. Not just flying everything else, too. Harold Peterson. Reunion planned. Everyone from Flight 4387 who wants to attend. Next month, hope you'll come. She didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. Instead, she opened her duffel bag, pulled out the challenge coin, held it up to the window light. Spectre Squadron, Air Combat Command. For 5 years, this coin had been a memorial, a reminder of what she'd lost, a wound she carried in silence. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was proof that credentials didn't define capability, that wings were decoration, but flying was bone deep. She'd spent 5 years believing the Air Force when they said she was broken. But broken things could still function, could still save lives, could still do the impossible when physics and skill aligned. Her phone buzzed. New message. Unknown number. Lieutenant Washington, this is Captain Martinez. I'm told you saved my life and 201 others. When I'm cleared to fly again, I'd be honored if you'd consider joining United as a training captain. We need people who can teach what you did up there. David. Kesha stared at the message. Training captain. Not flying the line, not pulling G's or dodging Sam's, but teaching the next generation how to handle the impossible. How to fly when everything was broken. How to land when you couldn't see the ground. How to trust yourself when everyone else doubted you. She looked at the coin one more time. Placed it on the windowsill where morning light turned it gold. Picked up her phone. Typed, Captain Martinez, I'd like to discuss the position. When are you available? Sent. Outside, a 767 rotated off runway 13, the same runway she'd landed on 3 days ago. Climbing into clear sky, wings flexing, physics and will combining to make metal fly. She watched it disappear into clouds. And for the first time in 5 years, she smiled. Not because she had her wings back, but because she'd proven she never really lost them.